Live. It is Thursday, June 25th, 11 a.m., and this is DB Hangops. Today we're going to be talking about automation, part two, a whole bunch more stuff with it. We've got Shlomi here now, so I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of other things to talk about, and hopefully we can get Pim to sneak out some stuff too. And also, hopefully more people will show up to share their experiences and talk about things. So why don't we quick round of introductions. I'm Jeffrey Anderson. I am a DBA at Box. How about you, Pim?
As soon as I can find the mute button. I'm Pim van der Wal. I'm a DBA at Acquia.
And Shlomi.
So I'm Shlomi Noach. I'm a system engineer at Booking.com. And before I begin, it's just I'm so happy that Pim is here because I prepared a tribute to Pim. So Pim is a past Dutch who lives in the US, and he really prides himself with good beers. So I bought the cheapest beers I could find at the supermarket in a can, and I'm just going to let Pim the honor of telling me which cheap beer I should drink right away.
Oh, that's got to be Jupiler. I mean, yeah, if you want to go for the bad taste in your mouth, that's the way to go. Sorry, Kenny. That's the worst that Belgium produces, I think. Cheers.
Cheers.
I wish I had a beer, but it's 11 in the morning.
That wouldn't stop me. I just don't have beer.
I'll drink my jasmine green tea instead.
Yeah, I'll cheer you.
Like a good, healthy person.
Okay, and actually, so now that you're here, Sylvia, do you want to introduce yourself super quick?
Hi, I'm Sylvia Butros. I'm the DBA at SendGrid.
Okay. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and dive into it. The stuff we have on deck today, all focused around automation, and automation, whenever that kind of topic is thrown out, it's a very broad thing, and sometimes folks actually feel it might be a very involved thing, like writing some really cool software stack that does all this stuff. But, I mean, realistically, automation can span all sorts of areas and technical depths, really. You know, it can be something as simple as I wrote a script that opens, you know, the same 4 Chrome tabs every day because, you know, why would I do that? To something, you know, I built this very involved architectural component that manages my replication topology and automatically fails data around, and something about pseudo GTIDs happens, and all over the board. And so I think what I wanted to get started with was just for everyone here, and as people come in, we can ask more questions, but just what's the last script you wrote and why? And you know, I'll give everyone a second to think about it, but it's really just to think about, like, it can be anything small to anything big. And if there's more than one, or if there's like 20 that you want to talk about, like, feel free. Like, we've got an hour, so.
Okay, so the last script I wrote is a couple of days ago, like nothing to pride myself for. It's a script that is by Puppet that verifies on either master, then it double checks that the event scheduler is running and that the events are enabled as opposed to slave side disabled, and if so, it just re-enables them. Nothing pretty, but useful.
Okay, sorry, yeah, my mute button's getting a little hard to click. For me, I can't think of it offhand. Probably some JRuby script for doing an H-based thing. You know, the easy one I'll throw out, I wrote Bash and Z Shell tab completion for a tool that we had. So we have a script for connecting to MySQLs in our environment. It's something like my cluster, then you put in the cluster name, and you can put in information around, like, you know, give me a read-only replica or the master, and passive or active. And so historically, you just had to know to type these offhand. And so the bit of automation I wrote, or the actual part that I amended to this tool, was tab completion. So you could type the tool name, my cluster, and then hit tab twice, and you would get a list of all possible clusters that you can punch in. It's been hugely, hugely useful for just kind of quickly navigating parts of the infrastructure, because you get to a size where host names are not important anymore. You know, DB5 doesn't mean anything. You know, it could be anywhere in your environment.
For me, the last thing was actually kind of a script of all the things that I do when I normally check one of our database servers that is having an issue. So all the checks that I normally manually do, I kind of scripted all together to kind of give me a quick analysis. it's very rudimentary, and I want to link it to the documentation pages to see what the follow-up should be, so other people can use it as well. But right now, as I said, I mean, you do all these manual steps. You check this log for specific things. You check that log for specific things. So I figured I'd just script it all together. But I mean, very specific to our platform. So very specific to the things that go wrong on our platform, which is why I probably won't open source it.
Oh, darn. There goes that 20 lines in Bash.
Exactly. I actually tried to make it in Ruby.
How about you, Sylvia? What's the last script that you wrote?
Not a script, but I think the last thing I did was on Monday a cookbook for a database schema that we have that currently is co-located with a few other schemas on our primary cluster, but I think it's time for it to move out of house. So I wrote a cookbook for it to basically shard it off to its own instance. So that's usually pretty standard. I actually could have all of those cookbooks looking almost the same, just enough for them to be different, I guess.
So actually that's interesting because I know with Chef there's kind of like that there's like a canned database cookbook or something, right? Like upstream.
So there are community cookbooks out there that are basically to install Percona server or just vanilla MySQL. In our case, my base cookbook that I wrap all of those around is actually written in-house. It seemed easier because there's a bunch of things that I needed to do on the boxes in advance, like things like IO schedulers and no A time and setting all sorts of little bits and pieces on those things in advance. So yeah, but the one I wrote a couple of days ago, that's basically a wrapper to that. So 99% of my stuff now is basically wrappers still on Cookbook.
Interesting. Okay, so you can actually write cookbooks that encapsulate another cookbook then, or is it that you wrote a script that does it?
No,
I've never used Chef, by the way. That's why.
Sure. No, they basically encapsulate them. So it's like a base cookbook, and then like this particular cluster will inside of it just call the other one, and then only have recipes in it that do the special stuff. And typically for the less complex databases on my end, the wrapper cookbook will basically have, hey, this is the schema that's on this particular instance, and these are the users that need to be on this particular instance, and that's pretty much it.
Okay, so that's actually kind of interesting. I mean, so we've talked about user management in the last one, where we used Chef, Puppet, or maybe other folks actually just hand apply the grants on the environment. But it's interesting to hear that it sounds like you manage schema through your Chef installation as well. Is that a right assessment there?
Yeah, I mean, it does it primarily for dev environments benefit. Okay. What happens is after it runs if I'm doing a production replica or I'm doing a stage one, I'll afterwards in the part of getting the data on the instance, that part gets it dropped and replayed anyway. However, I still have those recipes in there that create the schema as an empty schema because our developers use those same recipes, as far as I know, for their dev environment. So that way they can use that and actually just make one that looks just like production but without the data.
That's really good. Yeah, because in our environment, user management, instance level stuff, that's all managed through Puppet, and we have all that kind of contained there. But when it comes to the actual schema that goes into the data, into the actual instances and the data sets that are tied with it. And so, yeah, in production, typically you're probably cloning from an existing server, so it's already there. But
it doesn't matter, exactly.
Yeah, for anything that doesn't fall into that pattern, all of our schema is actually managed through a part of our application that is responsible for schema migrations and moving those along. And so actually, that would be my next question, is how are schema migrations then done for you if you have kind of this canned schema inside of Puppet? Do you just do an alter? Are you responsible to run PT online schema change, or is there some other automated flow tied into the code base that your developers use?
So because we are not single language, like maybe on language 5 now, we have a Python app that is standalone in a repo, and it has basically folders, and each folder is a particular schema. And inside of it, you have like a base SQL, and then you start adding migration files in it, and it has like a basic file that tracks what are the ones that are actually done. So it's very basic, and it has, and we basically package it in an RPM that's in our internal repo. And so that way, when I write recipes on my end where I want to create schema foo to look exactly like production, all I have to do is basically yum install our db schema package, and I pass it the arguments, and it creates it for me. There's a few other things it can do where it can bootstrap it for the internal ORM, and that's optional because depending on the developer, they might be actually using the ORM or doing something else. But that's basically what it does, and that makes it portable enough that I can grab it in a chef recipe. People can grab it within Dockers because we're also working on some Docker stuff now, or just grab it as is and run it on their MySQL that's installed on their laptop if they want to, which I do often actually.
Man, yeah. RPM package for schema. That's actually kind of cool sounding.
So I wrote the original Python script, and it was people in our engineering, well, it's now engineering services, but back then it was the infrastructure team. They did the packaging for me, and that's been in place. And basically Jenkins takes care of that, where it'll create those packages against integration or mastered, so that you can have like the latest one in Sage or the latest one that's actually production, and you can basically that way get the package that you want, so you get the version of it that you want.
So does that mean there's like a post-install script inside these packages that'll actually load the schema into an instance of MySQL?
The package will just will put everything in place. It doesn't run it. You basically end up with the ability to do db schema repo and give it the argument, and it's in your path, and it'll just do things for you.
Oh, got it. That's really cool. Okay, got it. Yeah. I'm curious for Pim and Shlomi, like schema. How is that done at your respective places?
In our case, Drupal does its own deployment.
Yay!
Solved. Done.
We get to the servers. Oh wait, it's running.
Yeah, the reason this was a thing is because it takes only a couple of times of a developer who was back in the day, back then when this was not a thing, they were building their development environments by hand, and they'd come and ask me, hey, where's the backup for database X? Without initial context, and you panic. And it turns out they're asking because they want to just make a local copy, and that's when you're like, yeah, they need a better way to do this, to not ask me about backups. So.
Sorry.
For us, there's a lot, like dozens and dozens of different schemas, and we like to have like a schema per topology, so we have dozens and dozens of masters and a lot of slaves behind them. So what we typically have is that every new schema is generated in some general purpose incubator, garbage can, whatever you call it, kind of master, and then later on it's been split or extracted outside. So we build a large replication topology beneath that one, and we just detach it and set replication filters, and then the schema lives on its own. Otherwise, we don't, deploy schemas. It's just production. We don't RPM a new schema or create a new schema in the sense of let's do and deploy that. We just, build the schemas as we go.
Yeah, to clarify, I don't actually use that package in production yet, although that was in the plan when we built it, but we haven't gotten there yet. When it comes to stage and production, I still do them by hand using online schema change, because to add on top the logic of, hey, do an alter here, but to do an online schema change here or whatever, like that just didn't happen at the time, and I haven't gotten back to it. But yeah, at least streamlined the whole dev environment thing.
Yes, so the dev environment in Booking has an interesting way of doing this. So every night we reclone a slave and set that as a master to our development environment. And so you have 24 hours to do whatever you want to do. Tomorrow morning you will have everything is going to be reset, but it's going to be reset with real production and live data that is available to experiment on. That means you cannot run some tests and expect the data to be the same. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? on one hand, and on the other hand, you're always working on fresh kind of data with fresh trouble and problems that are typically hard to inject in testing kind of data, sample data. So that's pretty cool. And like, okay, if we want to do an alter table and we're not sure is it going to be a heavyweight or master, and it just reflects the actual production environment. So we can try stuff there before moving into production. So it's very reliable, and it's an authoritative development setup.
Yeah, and I think what's very interesting about it is, the question of like, do you deploy the schema to all machines, kind of like Sylvia is saying, where you effectively have a schema file or something that dictates this is what the schema should look like on every single node, or do you just have the centrally managed one and then something that reaches out and applies it and then you're done? Because like here at Box, we have this really nice schema migrator, but it's not intelligent enough to automatically run PT online schema change for us yet. And so as a result, if we have like small tables, we could just run our migrator tool from a machine that has our application checked out, and it'll read our config, reach out to the machines that need it, and then just run the alter and it's done. But for larger tables, which is more and more stuff now, right? We need to do additional logic of like, okay, well if it's just one cluster, we can have it generate the online schema change. We'll just run that by hand, so it does lag checking on downstream replicas and then move on. The other solution, though, or the other thing we have is for our sharded environment where there's multiple clusters that you need to apply it on each individual shard there. We have another wrapper that will kind of pre-generate bash for loops with the online schema change command, so that we run one online schema change per cluster, so as not to completely saturate the replication stream while they're running. And then just kind of have those run down, and it takes a long time. It takes many days, more than a week, easy. And so there's definitely room like for making that way better, right? And who knows, maybe online alter with 5.6 and 5.7 might be a whole nother path that can be used there. Which actually is a question. Has anyone used the online alter in their environments, or planning to like start using it more? I'm pretty sure you have something to say about this, Sylvia.
Oh, I'm waiting to see, because I'm arguing with an online schema changes on attempt number 4 right now. So using the online DDLs, I'm definitely looking forward to that. I want to see how it behaves, because at the end of the day, like Percona online schema change, it's awesome, but it does add overhead. The triggers can be tricky sometimes, depending on the load you have. There's a lot of ways you can make it wimp out. That like, I'm almost done. Oh, sorry, I was kidding.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of the fact that you can't completely easily resume if it fails hard is, after you've spent hours altering. Well, hours is nice. After you've spent days altering that really big table and it fails at 99%. Because it just happened to hit that last attempt of lock wait timeout.
Yep. Great feeling. This is when you do online schema changes with the drinks in hand.
So how do you guys deal with the fact that, do you disable any failover during online schema changes?
That's actually a good question. So we don't, and typically we're trying to keep our sharded environment, the tables there, small enough that an alter should be able to finish within, I want to say, 8 hours. So if we have to do a failover, it probably means the active master we've been running online schema change through is already just in a bad state anyways, and we accept that we're going to have to start it again.
Okay, just curious, because we actually have an automatic failover which we would then have to disable. Not that we do online schema change.
Got it.
The customers themselves are responsible for doing their own schema changes.
But actually, something else I would going back to kind of the whole conversation around automation is, so one of the nice things with PT Online Schema Change is you can provide like a custom plugins script that can do things before certain points in online schema change. And so one of the things that we've built into that is before it adds the triggers to the original table, find any transactions that are locking records on that table and proactively kill them. so that they're not holding locks. Because if you have locks on there and you try to put a trigger on the table, that's a metadata lock, and you have to wait for those original ones to finish. And so everything stacks up behind that metadata lock, and your server will just get hosed pretty painfully. So
you started with an outage.
Let's just say I personally would run show process list a lot when I kicked off PT Online schema changes, and if I saw locking, I would find the top transaction and whack them. And then one day, someone else on my team's like, well, this sucks. I wrote a plugin that will just automatically kill those and report it to the chat room. And so same thing there. So basically, anytime those critical steps in online schema change happen, adding the triggers, renaming the table, before each of those, we'll check, are there any things that are locking records in the table? If so, let's kick them out real quick so we can do our metadata lock operation and then move on. And it's hugely successful, hugely helpful. And actually, we could probably open source that. I don't think we have. So that I'll take note to maybe do that. Sylvie's just like, yes.
So are you good? Are you then, by definition, good to kill any query running on your master? Is that okay? Does the application always gracefully retry, or fails gracefully?
That's a fair question, and that's kind of the assumption that we've started to operate under. I mean, if your machine gets in such a bad state where one connection is responsible for backing up stuff, like, it's got to go. And so we've put together automated tools. We automatically kill queries that run too long or run poorly, and transactions that potentially lock too many records to the point that the server becomes unhealthy. And so because we have the tools in place and we've really, really communicated this out, I think it's become kind of the accepted pattern that some requests will fail if it happens to hit this state. It's unfortunate. It could suck for a customer, but the reality is it protects the system from itself. And that's kind of the assumption we run under.
I support that.
Yeah, I'm a little bummed that Jeremy's not here, because every time he talks about how Etsy does it, they don't do online schema change. They do the thing. They have their own migrator tool that runs it on like a passive node and promotes and moves traffic around. And
yeah, but they already have that fancy ticketing system, so it makes the whole failover way simpler. So
that's true.
Yes.
Related to the whole automation thing, how do you guys promote your scripts? I mean, when you start with very simple script, do you actually hand it over at some point to an engineering team, or do you guys integrate and have your own testing for that?
So that's a super good question. I'll let other people answer first, because mine's going to be long-winded.
It actually resembles, not resembles, but it relates to a question I want to ask. So I'm going to just ask away, and we'll see how this develops. A previous coworker of mine used to say that scripts are evil, or shell scripts at least, are evil in the sense that it's hard to monitor them or see what's going wrong with them. So I think this discussion leads nicely into that. So, Jeff, go ahead, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, so yeah, if there's a problem, you fix it. It happens again, you fix it again, and think, well, okay, the steps are kind of well defined, and so you just wrap it in a shell script, or you write documentation, one of those two, and then you kind of iterate. And so in our case, like, we definitely have a lot of things that are just shell scripts, and they're probably, they leverage functionality from other tools. And in a perfect world, we would go back and build them into the other tools, but sometimes it's just not worth it. Like, a good example was the thing I mentioned at the beginning, how we have this MyCluster program that, it can connect you to the MySQL instance given some cluster definition, give me the active app read-only replica or something. And so that's just a shell script that under the hood is invoking a more well-defined and well-written tool that does all this kind of, parsing our configuration, identifying cluster auto-discovery, and figuring out where things are in the environment. And so the tool it's running under the hood, that is actually a well-tested, lots of unit tests, well-structured, like, it built an in-memory representation of the environment before querying all that information. And so that kind of grew over time as well. And I mean, initially we just had a lot of scripts. We had sed scripts to do our active passive flips for a while, and then they grew into shell scripts over time. And then we wrote this really nice, tool and logic, and it's in PHP right now, that would, parse our application configuration and then kind of crawl the topology. It would actually effectively shell out to SSH under the hood to like do a bunch of other discovery of things. And so it made it so we could, from a single machine, here's an instance of MySQL, go crawl its whole replication topology and tell me about everything connected to it. And so that's one of those situations where we built a tool there, and we started to build kind of a scripting framework in our PHP code base that, you could leverage that and tie into that. And so the short answer is, most folks on my team, when they're new, they don't know a lot about this code base, or maybe they're not as strong at programming initially. And so if they can just write shell scripts that wrap those things, that's fine. And then, after it's been kind of communicated out to the team, hey, I wrote this program that solves this problem, maybe one or two of us will iterate on it back and forth. And it might get to a point where, wow, it'd be really great if it could do these other things. And that's when we start to talk about, hey, we could put this into our formal PHP program code base and, write unit tests for it, build other things off of it. And so I think I've mentioned on Hangouts before where we have a tool called MySQL Clone. You say, here's a source, here's a comma-separated list of destinations, put that MySQL instance on all these other machines. And that grew. It started as we had a nice long document that I wrote up in Confluence that described how to do an extra backup of some arbitrary instance on one machine to an arbitrary instance on another. And that was partially shell scripted and only worked for single instance machines. And so we took that and we wrapped it into our code base. And basically the main function was, step 1, confirm there's enough disk space. Step 2, set up your SSH pipelines to do the copies. Step 3, start the extra backup. Step 4, run apply logs. Step 5, set up replication. Done. And the tool's grown organically over time. Like the newest change we just added was, check our application config and see if your source machine is customer facing. If it is, prompt the user, hey, it's customer facing. Extra backup does run a flush table with read lock, which will lock everything for a couple seconds. Or if you're okay with that, then we can continue. And at that point, it's just you kind of grow your tools organically over time.
Well, what I was kind of curious about, we kind of have a distinction between what the operations team produces as far as scripts, tools, whatever, and what our engineering or hosting engineering team actually produces. And once it kind of, I'm not going to say it goes over the fence because obviously there's communication between them, but there's very different standards that both teams work by. And there's always the discussion whether or not this can just stay as a script within the operations team or whether it actually becomes from your description, a bigger tool or a more well-grounded, definitely a better tested tool. But do you actually hand it over to a different team at that point, or do you just do all of that within one team?
So I mean, right now we this tooling code base. Like our team actually owns it. We've welcomed folks from our engineering organization into it to see it and look at it. And there's larger initiatives around more reusable infrastructure management components that are being worked on by developers, for engineers in our organization. And so things like I would actually just kind of categorize it as all of our developers know about this code. Some have touched it at one time or another, but for the most part, they're actually going to start building a layer below it so that for us, we still have our tools that we interact with, and the way we interact with our environment is actually going to go through a different set of code that our developers are writing, and so they'll just kind of interface through. There's going to be an interface between our tools and the stuff they're writing to manage other parts of the infrastructure. Yeah, and I mean we have these larger automation projects that we want to do. A good example is catching bad queries in our dev environment automatically. So we had a group of folks who work specifically on that. And build that into our testing framework that for our primary application. And then other stuff like schema migrations, our team could do that. That's something that we're probably going to have a development group work on, though, just because they'll be able to invest more resources into it than we would right now, since we have to manage the live infrastructure as well. And I imagine like we'll probably go into the code base periodically, after it's been put together and make changes as needed as well. But I think it's because like we kind of have, for the longest time, it was our team building our own tools, and we're starting to blur that line and have a lot more collaboration with various developers in our organization. So it's something that's growing right now.
Well, that's definitely where the reason I raise it is because it's one of the pain points that in some cases where getting the script to kind of go across that line and having the other team kind of take over. You generally don't want a script to change ownership halfway during its lifetime.
So Silvio, you've been very quiet.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of things that were written initially like on my side of the team and then went to engineering. I think the only one is that same repo for the DB schema. When it first started, it was us trying to only track schema changes and track in there like what has been approved and done in stage and what has actually already been done in production. But very quickly in its lifetime, it turns out that you can't even start certain applications in a dev environment without some seed data. And so very early on, it became a shared ownership between my end and QA / the engineering teams, where they started dropping in seed data files that were only used for development. And so part of that tools arguments now is you can also tell it, hey, also put the seed data in. Obviously not safe for production, and so that's one of the reasons we have kept it only in use in certain environments, but it's not that hard to build guards around that kind of thing. So I'm hoping, I think in the future, if I were to expand its use with free time that I have, is to actually plug it into, yeah, right. If it were to have a component of, say, chef search or service discovery, and start to know where it's running, have awareness where it's running, it would be a part of it. In which case, you start making it more robust and use it in more environments. But yeah, that's one of the examples where it was written in the ops side and actually used even more heavily on the engineering side, and in which case it became a shared stakeholders basically on it. Other stuff that has sort of taken a more disciplined approach has been more of scripts that have been handed to me from our consultant team. I work with a large team of remote DBA consultants who help me out, and I offload a lot of work to them. They don't do Chef. However, we do pretty much everything in Chef. So it's been the other way of, hey, I want a script that does X, and I would turn around and basically plug it into as part of our Chef cookbook so that it's available to use wherever it's needed and actually looks the same everywhere and not being managed by hand. So I think that's the only other case there where there's been some handoff and things are not just a shell script in someone's laptop that nobody knows about.
Yeah, when we have like a shared module managed by Puppet for all of kind of the DBA scripts, and we have a custom bash RC that sets up a series of aliases and functions that all the DBAs use. And it's one of those things like you can write a script to do a thing, and that's great. And if you use it all the time, that's really great. But one of the things we really push on the whole team is like, hey, if you write it and it's like actually really freaking useful, put it into the shared repo, tell everyone about it, put it in the documentation. And it's just kind of that organic. The nice thing is if someone writes a tool that solves a problem, someone else will find a bug with it or something else they wish it did and iterate, and then you just have the back and forth.
Exactly. Try not to let someone else on the team reinvent that same wheel. And I think a big part of that has been just, writing, like a part of why I wanted to rewrite our cookbooks to be a cookbook per cluster is you can easily at that point drop a runbook.md in each of those repos, and you can explicitly say there, hey, this particular cluster has these kinds of automations that are not everywhere else, like partition rotation scripts or tools that manage this particular cluster because its instances look different or have a different socket or something like that. So small details like that will differ from one cluster to the other, because as much as we all want everything to be consistent, sometimes it just can't be. So at least if there's a way to communicate it that is in the same repo that manages that cluster, it becomes very easy to find. So that's a way to break that communication barrier, basically.
Yeah. So actually, Shlomi, for you, because you're kind of on, I feel like you're kind of in a different perspective on this, where you're more focused on actually engineering solutions for the infrastructure. Like, I could be wrong about that. I mean, feel free to.
Yeah. In the past month, I've been much more on the engineering side than on the the daily DBA work, and I used to be more on that side, Right now, I'm more on the programming side. Okay, so there's been a lot of questions here. To answer some of Pim's original questions. Once the script gets a reasonable size, you just can't let it live like that. You have to wrap it. You have to make it engineering grade kind of code, right? Like most scripts we write, like if I write a shell script, I confess I don't do unit testing for that. It's just it doesn't fit in usually. It's like a hit and runs kind of. It's me. So
the Sleep 20 works. Trust us.
So whenever it's way past like an if else for something, you gotta productionize it, and that's the time when you usually want to build something. It could move to Python. It could move to something more like a little bit more login, better error handling, something that is more visible, that is more auditable. And you usually can't just let it keep running like 100 to 200 lines of shell script. It doesn't hold water. So at this point, it is very sad that most DBAs lose the ownership of their code, because many programmers are great programmers, but they don't understand the domain. And once the DBA loses ownership, they can never any longer go and fix that piece of code. Maybe they just need to add a couple more lines, but the whole environment is different, and they don't even know how to deploy that code anymore, or how to compile that code, or whatever. Sometimes it's just a PHP code or Python, which is trivial to just directly deploy, and sometimes it's a whole new build system, etc., and that ownership is not in their hands anymore. And that's like the sad truth of write some automation, but at some stage it becomes too large, and it would be best if the DBA could also do programming. But if not, then I think an ideal case would be that some developers are really database oriented, or are actually in the same team, the same SRE team as the DBAs, and not someone who is completely external, sitting outside in some doing like either a favor, or he does that as well, but you should talk to his team lead to get approval, to get like a half a day's work now if you want to fix something. And it should really be understood that a DBA team needs a programmer. So either the DBAs are good programmers, or there needs to be a programmer in the team.
Right. I fully agree with that. One problem is that nowadays development environments are becoming more complex. With the integrated testing, the continuous testing, and version control and everything. To the point where even if you're a decent programmer as a DBA or as a sysadmin, that doesn't mean you'll be able to handle the code base and everything that goes with it easily. So kind of what we're working on is to see if we can actually team up somebody from the operations team with somebody from the engineering team to kind of help them push changes through. I mean, I can make changes to tools quickly enough, but if I then have to spend hours trying to coach it through testing and stuff like that, that may be a waste of my time.
And so I think an interesting thing there is, and the reason that I think our code base was able to come together so well is we had someone who was predominantly focused on kind of engineering services and productivity engineering, join the operations group and really own this kind of automation effort in the operations group. And so one of the hardest things about setting up a code base is, it's easy to bootstrap a new code environment, build some frameworks maybe or something. Well, frameworks might be hard, but getting something that does it already maybe. But the hard part is setting up your test environment, things to automatically run the unit test, best practices, sharp edges about the language. If you're using PHP, do you want to use Pair? Do you want to use Composer? If you're in Python, you're going to use pip, or you're going to use what the other one is, like virtual end. Like just all those kind of things come up. And it's nicer if you can have someone who is kind of more responsible to be the steward for that and own that part of it, and then it becomes significantly easier. And so in our case, like we had our code base put together, and we could run unit tests with PHP unit, and they worked. But having them run automatically so that we could tell if a build was broken or not, that was kind of beyond our scope. And so someone was able to come in and put all that together, which like suddenly now we'll get an email if someone merges a change and a unit tests start failing, and we can actually have more confidence. Like we've built our unit tests in a way that they validate the assumption of these programs. If the unit tests for MySQL clone fail, I want someone to fix that because that tool is used every day, multiple times by people on our team. We do need to trust that it's working, but at the same time, I want people on our team to feel empowered to make changes to that. And I think one of the most For me, one of the most valuable things I learned after getting my hands into to more involved code like this, just for tools though, was mocking. So typically you're going to write out a program and you'll have a test MySQL box that you connect it to every time. Well, if you write a unit test that depends on that, now you need to have a MySQL instance running somewhere. And so one of those niceties is starting to learn some better programming practices. If you have a function that'll prompt for user input, kick that out to a separate function, so that you can actually test the specific logic inside of something that would normally do that. And so things like having canned responses, like you would connect to MySQL, you would run show slave status, and it would return some sort of data, and ultimately your program's just checking what is seconds behind master. Well, you can write a canned response so that when your code is unit testing, you don't need to connect to a live MySQL that has replication. You just return a string that says second behind master 10. And you want to see that your program will take an action if it's over 10 or something. And so I think this was kind of that interesting pattern when you learn that writing software is not writing software, the hard part is not writing the actual program. It's the additional 5 to 10 hours of unit testing that you have to write and think about after the fact. And so, Pim, I'd agree with you to some extent, like, that can be a waste of time when you have like all these other things to work on, which is why for a lot of folks, I can write a shell script, it works most of the time. For the 5% of times that it'll fail, I'll just put a sleep 60 and it works again. So whatever, it's good enough. And that's where I'd agree.
No sleeps.
And I'd say I'd agree. Like partnering with a developer or someone in your development team, or really kind of driving that collaboration and trying to get someone to work on these things with you might actually be the right solution. And you could be something as simple as I'm going to write a unit test that just runs the whole program. And it depends on a MySQL being there. And then having someone else who, the next time they touch it, they can do the more formal work and make it all work better.
Right, exactly. And it's kind of where we're going. And as far as Shlomi, what you said before about getting people involved actually, or getting your developers to actually deal with production problems as well. I mean, we try to do that occasionally. The problem is that there's still a difference between what they do, between people dealing with that operational issues on a day-to-day basis and engineers once in a while dealing with them. So even if you let them do a rotation in operations team, they deal with it for a week, but it's not quite the same. It doesn't have the same effect. Let's put it that way. Plus the fact that you're going to have to put a lot of effort into training these people to actually be able to handle it, which might actually be effort well worth it. But.
So I want to give an example of something that's going on in Booking.com. So my colleague Caroline Nage wrote a tool. We call it the DBA tool, and it's a Python application that does all sorts of things. Like if we want to clone a server, we go to the DBA tool, DBA clone server. If we want to shut down MySQL, DBA MySQL stop, right? Stop slave, start slave, reverse replication, stuff like that, right? And it just became this kind of a framework where it was designed well. There's good logging and auditing, So more to be improved, but it's already something that, you know, anyone can come in and create a new command and just follow the same pattern of, you know, try catch, logger warning, etc. It's just so much of that. So it's mostly a lot of copy and pastes, and anyone can add new functionalities that, okay, now I want to create a snapshot or run extra backup. It's easy to break that into steps that are easily manageable within that framework. So that's like a one-time effort done by a developer that is now being used by all the DBAs, and everyone can always, you could acquire locks and, you know, block someone else from doing the same operation at the same time as you, or ask something of a remote server, etc. So it becomes more of a monster, but it's easy to get into also to the DBA. So maybe that kind of solution is a nice one to go with. So someone just sets up the right framework for everyone to work with. You don't need to be a full-blown engineer for that.
And I really like that idea of effectively making it so to create a new script, here's the boilerplate, here's the template, cut and paste it. These functions, you could just run it by default and it'll do nothing. And then there's a base set of functions, one to set up the command line args, your help function to be populated. Ideally, having those linked would be even better. And then, you know, you can just kind of iterate from there. And at that point, it's just a matter of, you know, maybe having a good method for helping people understand the best way to build a tool to solve a problem. You know, plan out the steps that have to happen, and then just iterate on it from there. The other thing is, honestly, one of the most valuable things I learned working here and working on tools was that you could write that beautiful error log parser with a nice set of regexes to figure out when certain things have happened in the server, or you could put a sleep 60 and that works. And being comfortable with saying, like, you know, put a to-do comment above it, like, this is janky, this works 99% of the time unless the server's unhealthy. And then kind of go from there. And until it actually becomes a problem that manifests somehow, it's fine. You know, it'll solve the problem. But also to your point, Shlomi, of being able to have a thing where, yeah, I want to be able to get this information from a server, having the framework that'll just, you know, effectively under the hood, SSH to the server, run a command. You know, connect to the MySQL, run a command. Like, those should be free things to do. And then ensuring that there's documentation that shows it, and even better, an example script that shows it. And then at that point, you're golden, and it's easy to package and build. So something I was curious, what's kind of the preferred language used for, one is for the super quick scripts, and then two is for the more engineering, nicely built tools and scripts?
I usually start with just shell script. If I need a little bit more, PHP was my quick go-to, but most of our code base is written in Ruby, and I'm trying to switch to that, and rewrite some of my stuff to it.
Yeah, I also go ahead.
I was going to say it's usually Bash if it's a for loop. Otherwise, it's going to be a Python script. But that's also because Python was the first language I learned. We are also mostly Ruby, but I only go for Ruby if it's going into a cookbook. Sometimes I've even broken that rule if I don't have the time. If I have it already in Python and it works.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same for me. If it's a small thing that needs to integrate, it's a shell script. Otherwise, it's probably up to Python. And if it really needs to be full-blown something, right now it's Golang. It could be Java or whatever. Yeah, but Python is nice to go through, and it's really smart. You can do lots of stuff, and it's interpreted. No fuss. It's a no fuss kind of language.
Yeah, it has really nice system-level libraries that can do stuff for you. And at the end of the day, even if I throw the Python script into the Chef Cookbook as is, I can still make it do enough proper exit codes and stuff like that I can still mini test around it in Ruby.
Now, only SQL, MySQL supported shell scripting in SQL. I do everything in SQL.
So it's funny you say that. I don't remember the name of it offhand right now, but Facebook released a thing where you can use, instead of running command line tools, you can do SQL-style syntax to query all information about a system.
Yes, I did.
I'm gonna go out and say it. I hate SQL syntax. It's nearly impossible to program in that stuff.
I'd agree with Sylvia, which is why I thought that was. I think Facebook had built it. I don't remember what it's called.
The name escapes me too, but you're right. I think it was Facebook, and I saw it, and I'm like, no, I want to get away from that. Backwards.
But the thing I was going to say, so for me, it starts as a one-liner until it gets to about 6 lines, and at that point, or if I need to give it to someone else and it needs to be easy to clean, then it'll become a bash script. And then if it's H-based, it'll probably become a JRuby script because JRuby's the shell interpreter that you use for H-based usually. And beyond that, yeah, the next jump is usually our Python or our PHP code base that we already have for a lot of our tools. Python here and there. I haven't done Python as much as I want to. I'm definitely more comfortable with PHP right now. That's what it was. OS query from Facebook. Let me get that up on the screen share super quick. Anyone who hasn't seen this yet.
Used for procedure, right?
SQL-powered operating system instrumentation. Yep. And so, I mean, it's kind of nice, like if you're not familiar with everything under /proc or all the various system level tools to get at this stuff, like it's definitely helpful for people to learn, and it gives you a nice standard interface across operating systems. So that's good, but I agree with Sylvia. Like I don't want to run SQL to get at that. I'd rather do df-h, lsof, and that's that probably. Anyways, so we've got about 9 minutes left. I'm kind of at a loss right now. I mean, I guess I can go back to kind of the topics we had, unless folks have other questions they wanted to ask or kind of poke at. Okay.
I'm just, I'm writing master failover automation right now, and it's just the kind of stuff that you need to talk to MySQL, you need to talk to some operating system, you need to set down VIPs, or talk to a switch, or talk to a DNS, or talk to Zookeeper, and you need to talk to a lot of components, and that's like a nice example of when automation is way beyond scripting. There's complex logic. You might halfway through find out that, oops, this operation cannot complete. We need to roll back. Is there a way to do that? So it's just the complexity just hits me again and again, and yeah. So I'm just giving this as a counterexamples to something that is very system oriented, right? We're failing over a master. We need to point applications to a different master, and it's really combined of a lot of simple commands, but altogether this is way beyond scripting and should really be managed by something more engineered.
But something that still allows you to go at that system level easily.
True. Yeah, so, yeah, for my part, I'm just invoking all scripts, and those are like the smaller building blocks that I use to make the system whole. But the logic involved and error tracking and figuring out what each error means. Does that mean I need to roll back? Does that mean I can just push forward and shoot the other node in the head? That kind of logic is really non-scriptable, I think.
And that's the thing is, it is scriptable. To your point, it can all be scripted. You can have a single script that coordinates all of it, but when you get down to it, I mean, if you're going to build all these components in a shell script or multiple shell scripts, you do need to start asking the question. Like, if you have a wrapper of a wrapper of a wrapper that coordinates 3 other things, if it works, it works. And if it ain't broke, you don't necessarily have to fix it. But you might want to start asking the question, especially around as the environment grows and other changes come in. Do you want to have more confidence? And the big one is, do you want it to be unit tested? Do you want to have confidence that things run the way they should? And that's a prime example. And Orchestrator is the most beautiful manifestation of this. Of every single DBA does this somehow. They juggle replication. Everyone's written a script to do something. Everyone's written a small program to do it, and now Orchestrator is like, okay, we're gonna try and like capture all of this actually and do it, and then, like you're saying, Shlomi, all of the things you have to talk to. It's a lot of coordination. It's a lot of orchestration, if you will. So I do have one last question I want to get out before we wrap up today, which is, whenever you go to a new job, a new place, what is the first script or tool that you are going to write? Just that first thing, if it's not there, that you have a feeling it's probably not going to be there, and you're going to build it. And Shlomi, you can't just say, I'm going to install Orchestrator. That doesn't count. Everyone's thinking about it.
I guess it's the kind of script that pulls data that you're used to get some kind of data, and at that workplace they look at data differently or miss that specific kind of data. You just want to get visibility, because that's what kicks you into working at a new company. You want to understand what's going on around you. So just grab data, maybe throw it to Graphite the way you like it, maybe just collect it to yourself in some preferred way. Just write scripts that gather data.
Yep, I was about to say the same thing, and it's exactly what I did when I started at Acquia. We didn't have Graphite in place then, so I just had something that wrote line by line, the data that I wanted, completely independent of any other backend they have. And I've written scripts like that for multiple environments. Just an easy way without getting graphs and without digging into whatever infrastructure everybody has to get that data. Absolutely.
How about you, Sylvia?
I don't have a good answer because technically SendGrid was my first job as a DBA. My last job I kind of was, but it wasn't official, so I didn't do a whole lot of automation around it, and I'm just taking notes from those two guys.
I mean, same here. Obviously, it sounds like getting the pulse, and I'd say for me, it's after I pulled in my dot files, which has a mountain of aliases and functions for all sorts of stuff I do, and my tmux config, I think the first one is probably, it's got to be something to collect data on the whole environment. There's got to be a server list of everything you're responsible for, and if there's not, that's probably the first thing, is finding a way to generate that, and then the next one after that, my personal favorite is generating GNU plot graphs in the terminal based on input data. Which is not hard to do, and it's really useful if you don't have a monitoring solution set up yet. Yeah. So, okay. So we've got 3 minutes left. I think we've really killed this topic. So I want to solicit for topics for the next time.
InfoSec.
You suggested that. Yeah, that's probably a good one.
What about InfoSec though? Because that we've talked about various aspects of it before. That's a very big one.
You probably want to talk about compliance, don't you, Sylvia?
Compliance.
Talk about what?
Compliance.
Well, that's one side of it, but it's like, how do you... Because it came up in my head when Shlomi was mentioning how they re-snapshot the dev environments with production data every night. A lot of InfoSec people will probably cringe at that, especially if you have any kind of person identifiable information, which all of us do, no matter what we do. So there's things like that. How do you keep your InfoSec people happy, but at the same time, there's gotta be what do you how do you automate scrubbing stuff? Do you just how do you manage the users? Stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff in it, I think, that could get could have interesting answers and be handled differently between us.
Okay. All right. Got it. What else? Shlomi, give me a topic. Shlomi makes faces.
I think we lost Shlomi.
I probably should take responsibility for that. I suggested he take the beer that killed the most brain cells.
So maybe actually, Shlomi, would you be interested in talking about some of the stuff with bin log servers and Orchestrator and how that works, or?
Sure. Let me try and build something up. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be happy to.
Cool. Let's put Shlomi's name on that. Yeah. Log servers and Orchestrator. Okay.
You just volunteered somebody. I like that.
Yeah, that's what I do, man.
I'm told.
Okay, so I guess I'll also kind of solicit other folks, and if anyone has other suggestions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, email, or any other means that you have to connect to me. Also, the other thing, so I won't be here in 2 weeks, so there will not be a DB Hangops in 2 weeks. Okay, fine, Shlomi, you can be happy. So the next DB Hangops will be, I believe it's July 23rd. Let me make sure. Obviously, this is Pacific time, so wherever you are on the GMT scale. My calendar's not opening. Oh, there it is. So, oh, my calendar's freezing, guys. I can't figure it out. Yeah, I want to say it is...
If it's 4 weeks from now, it's July 23rd.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, everything on my computer started freezing.
Okay.
So, yeah, so July 23rd will be the next DB Hangops. I will put up blog posts about it. And again, if you have any suggestions for topics or things to talk about, hit me up, let me know. And with that, we'll see everyone in 4 weeks.
Awesome. Assuming you're going over.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.